got to that point, because I showed up here not believing in God, not believing in anything bigger than myself, thinking that I could fix everything myself, that I really had the willpower to do it. I thought that was a manly thing to do, is to not ask for help. So hopefully I can kind of tell you how I got to the point of asking for help. I really ran out of options. That's really what it came down to. But yeah, so I grew up right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and once was a small town, Holly Springs, North Carolina. It's not really small anymore, but yep, I grew up there, grew up playing sports, was always competitive, primarily baseball, but I played a little bit of hockey, football, and just loved the competitive atmosphere from like a young age. I loved competing with other people. I loved comparing myself to other people, and I think that was really why I enjoyed it so much. I loved that. I loved to win. I loved to beat other people, and I kind of carried that with me throughout the rest of my life. When I was 10, that's when my parents split, and I would say that's the earliest memory I have of kind of like screw everything, you know, that kind of self-centered sort of ideology, if you will, really started to manifest. Pretty much since then, I thought, you know, this victim mentality, kind of justifying all my actions to, you know, why I fought other kids physically, why I did this, why I did that. I'm like, I'm different. And I kind of carried that with me. Started, and I'll go ahead and preface this. I had a problem with just about any drink, any drug, anything that kind of like got pushed across the table my way. Anything that made me feel different, I was pretty much okay with. But let me backtrack. So I was 13 years old. That was a big year when I loved being in physical altercations. I just loved the adrenaline rush. I got satisfaction from it. Which that kind of behavior as a 13-year-old led to some consequences. So I got arrested for the first time when I was 13. I was handcuffed in front of my 7th grade. I can't remember what class it was, but it was in school. So yeah, I got carried out by cops, was gone for a couple weeks, and came back, and everyone was like, dude. They were like, what happened? And so I kind of had to explain that one a little bit to all my friends, but again, that fed into that poor me mentality. You know, I'm going to use this now to justify all my actions. You know, what other 13-year-olds are doing that? Which I'm sure there's others, but at the time, it was me against everyone. So I finished out my 7th grade school year, and my parents and the court system said it was probably a good idea to go to a wilderness program, which, if you don't know what a wilderness program is, it's like teenage behavior rehabilitation through like hard work. And I got really good at pushing wheelbarrows, digging stumps, and it wasn't fun. It was not fun. They call it what do they call it? It's some sort of boarding school. It's got a name to it. But anyways, I spent 14 months there. And that school gave me every tool in the toolbox for me to be successful. I turned 14 there. I got out 5 days before freshman year of high school. And I did not apply a single one of the tools that they gave me. I immediately got into partying, using that as kind of, you know, my way to socialize. It was an all-boys boarding school as well, which I kind of took that as like, oh my God, I got to learn how to talk to women again. So what better way to do that than with alcohol? And that was my justification for that. And again, it's just a series of justifications for poor actions is really what it is. But everyone tried to pull me into playing baseball that year. I didn't want to. I just wanted to party. I just wanted to get to know people, all that, and have a good time. And I got no satisfaction out of that. I ended up playing baseball again my sophomore year of high school, and it kind of re-energized my void that I was trying to fill. And let me backtrack a little bit. I grew up Catholic, went to church on Easter and Christmas, and that's about the extent of my faith up to this point. I stopped believing in God. I didn't think He was there for me. If there was a God, why, the cliche thing, why would bad things happen to me? That self-centered sort of ideology again taking place. And so I picked back up playing baseball, and it filled that void for me. Having that competitive nature. I loved going up against other people. There was better players than me. I wanted to be better than them. It's funny, to this day, my high school coaches still talk about how many bullpens I would throw in practice and how I didn't have Tommy John surgery in like junior year of high school. But so I used that. I started gaining, a lot more friends that way. I had my core group of friends, but it kind of, built out a network, if you will. And like that was the thing to do at the high school, to be on the baseball team. It gave you status. It gave you pretty much everything you were looking for. And at this point, I kept my priorities somewhat intact. Baseball came first. Well, school should have been first, but that was not first. But it was baseball, partying, and then school, and I maintained that for a while. My grades did reflect that, and I ended up going to a junior college to play baseball, to try to get my grades up and all that. And there, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a great time in high school, drinking and doing all that. That's what I tried to always go back to. Well, I get to college, and I find out there's no drug tests. There's, they don't really care about the drinking as long as you show up to practice on time, do what you're supposed to. So it pretty much became a daily thing where it was practice, and then everything else. So I was able to maintain somewhat of a routine for a couple months, and I actually earned a starting spot at the junior college. As a pitcher. I was supposed to be the number 2 guy behind this other guy, and I hurt my elbow. So I received a slight tear in your UCL ligament, which is the Tommy John ligament. You need a full tear to get the surgery. And if you go to a junior college, they're not really trying to spend extra money like a big school would. So they said just rest for 5 months. So the one thing I went to college for, I couldn't even do. And that's pretty much where it took off. I'm like, well, why would I wait till, 6 p.m. when I can start at 9 a.m.? I have no other obligations other than class, and I was like, yeah, I can do it before class. I'll be fine. Well, that led to me flunking out. My sophomore year. I ended up coming back. It was just never the same. It was, at this point, it was very hard to keep those priorities straight. So I just put the other priority in front of baseball and tried to make baseball kind of like a side thing that I was doing. It was like my side quest, if you will. And at this point, finances weren't exactly flowing. So I found means to be a salesman, I guess is a good way to put it, to make money on the side to help fund pretty much all my activities that I was doing. Yep, I failed out. I came back to the Raleigh area because this was out in Kinston, North Carolina. If you've ever been there, I'll ask why. But if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. Got back to the Raleigh area and just started working. I said school wasn't for me. I'm going to get into the workforce, so got a job at a local food line and worked part-time construction. I was able to maintain that for, I don't know, six to 8 months successfully, receiving paychecks. And at this point, I'm running with the wrong crowds, still acquiring money any way I can. Sometimes by taking it, sometimes by selling things for it. Partying was a daily thing. That was priority number one, really. And that was the sole purpose I was working. Got kicked out of my apartment, moved back in with my dad. He took me under his roof. He was trying to kick me out. Actually, he did kick me out. Kicked me out for selling weed out of the house because he was renting at the time and was worried about getting himself kicked out. He didn't own the property. So I moved out to Raleigh off Western Boulevard, and at this point, let me backtrack a little bit. So over Christmas break one year, I want to say it was my sophomore year, I actually got arrested again for public intoxication, disturbing the peace, and resisting a public officer. The resisting a public officer was the one that they were really mad about. I was extremely drunk. I was mouthing off at these cops, saying I deserved it. I'll put it that way. I deserved it. They were some clever insults, but not something you want to do against the law enforcement. And that led to an overnight stay before I got bailed out, but that resulted into drug and alcohol rehab classes at Southlight in Raleigh, in addition to community service. And I met some friends there. I started hanging out with them, and I think a big thing that Drew said before I came up here was the friendships and how vital that was for me early on in sobriety. It was a detriment to me before I came in here. And I just hung out with anybody who was down to do the same thing that I was. Started going to the places in Raleigh that everyone says don't go. Started hanging out with the people that were making money extremely quickly, and that was my life for the next 2 years. Well, it got to a point where they accepted white people into a specific group, so I became an asset to this specific group of friends that I had hanging around. Well, I was not okay with that, and we kind of dragged it on for a little while. Well, long story short, that kind of ended up with me being involved too much and resulting in retaliation. So we robbed these people one night. I was pretty messed up that night. I kind of botched the exit, if you will, which led to a giant argument and led to just a series of events afterwards, which resulted in threats towards my father's life. And this is the point in my, I guess, running around outside, doing drugs, drinking, doing everything that I knew was wrong, but didn't really care. That's when it all caught up to me. Is when I started realizing that other people were actually going to be affected by my actions. Because up to this point, I didn't really care what happened to me. It was hard for me to understand why anybody cared to begin with, because this was my life. Why do so many people care? And, they tried to have interventions or talks or whatever you want to call it, and people are sitting across from me crying asking why, I'm living this sort of lifestyle, and I'm sitting there laughing at him because I'm like, why do you care? I just could not comprehend a selfless ideology. It was always me, I went through these things. I can justify my actions by this. And it all finally crashed down, and I realized, okay, when I put my father's life at risk, that's when I was like, I can't do this anymore. And growing up, I feel like this is a big part of my story. My mom was in and out of rehab herself quite a few times. But at this specific moment, she was sober. She had been sober for about 1.5 years at that point. So after 4 or 5 days, sitting in my garage guarding my household, my dad came out and looked at me. He was like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And I was like, I gotta protect you." And he was like, and he's not really a believer in God or churchgoer or whatever, but he looked at me direct in the eyes and said, "Man, if God wants to take me off this earth today, I'm completely okay with that, but I cannot keep watching you live the way you're living." And that just, it struck me so deep that I'm like, okay, I can't do this anymore. So I called my mom, said, "Hey, do you know any rehab facilities that I can go to?" And I'll preface this. At the time, I just wanted to get away from the lifestyle I was living. I didn't really think staying sober was an option. I didn't think it was possible. I was 21 years old at the time, and I was like, there's just no way I can fathom going the rest of my life without smoking weed, getting drunk, you name it. There's no way. So I go into Wilmington Treatment Center at 21 years old, walked in, and I think the first thing they said to me was, "Take it a day at a time." And I'm like, "The hell? What does that mean?" I'm like, "Dog, I gotta think about the future here." Like, I can't just think about today. But they had phenomenal therapists there. They gave me the classes that I needed, and for that first week, I can honestly say I was fully prepared to not drink alcohol ever again. That's my problem. Not do this. That was my problem. I think I'm going to try to only smoke weed, because when I get too drunk, there's no controlling anything. And that was sort of my intent. And it's funny when it says it in the big book, like, we switch from this to this, we switch from scotch to brandy, we switch to this. I thought I could contrive, a perfect recipe or, remedy for my problems. And that was absolutely me at Wilmington Treatment Center. Well, 1.5 weeks goes by, or 2 weeks. I can't remember exactly how long I was there for, but something just came over me. This is what it was. I was going to a bunch of NA meetings there, a bunch of AA meetings. Pretty much anybody who came in there, I was going to. And I went in there just judging all these people. I'm 10 days sober. Just like, oh, this dude, he's a loser. And just constantly comparing myself to other people and not even wanting to hear what they had to say. I was so close-minded at the time. But again, I took that sort of in with me to this specific AA meeting. It was a speaker meeting. This guy didn't look like me. He didn't dress like me. He was wearing a suit and tie. I'm like, what am I going to get from this guy? I'm sitting here 21 years old, know absolutely nothing about life, but think I do. And he laid out his story, and I could not believe that this guy standing in front of me was doing those things. And just something came over me, the power of, sharing his experience, strength, and hope. It really just impacted me that day. And I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll give this thing a shot for a month, see what happens. And that was a recommendation. Why don't you see how it goes for a year? And then if you want to go back, it's always going to be there. And I was like, you know what do I have to lose? I really have nothing to lose at this point. And so that day, I kind of made this promise to myself, I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. I made some friends in there. And one day, one of the friends said, hey man, I can get Percocets in here. I'm like, I got to get out of here. So I told my therapist, I think this was a Tuesday, and I was supposed to leave on that Thursday, and just like regularly. And I told her, hey, I need to leave right now. And she's like, hold on a second, slow down. What's going on? And I'm like, listen, I'm not going to tell you who, but I'm getting offered Percocets in here. I need to leave right now. And she goes, just wait till Thursday. Just hold off. We have some options for you. I'm like, nope. I got up and walked off the property. And as I was walking on whatever shipyard or whatever that road is in Wilmington, one of the house managers, if you will, so to give some context, there was the actual treatment facility, and then right across the street there was about 3 halfway houses that were connected to this treatment facility. So we would get bus there and back. And they always had a house manager over there who would, help you out if you needed, talk to you, do whatever. And this one guy I was not very close with was just happened to be driving by as I'm walking on the side of the street, and he goes, Matt, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm leaving, man. I can't do it anymore. And he was like, whatever you do, just don't drink and don't do anything else. He goes, just don't do it, man. And that was like the first little sign. I was like, hey, maybe there is a God. It just kind of was powerful. And fortunately, my mom came down, picked me up, brought me back up to Raleigh, and I got into an intensive outpatient program. They still allowed me to do that in Raleigh, in addition to going to AA meetings. So this IOP program was Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 3 hours. And I kind of just, I don't know, at the time I still wasn't really sold about this whole idea, but I was just showing up. I would say that's the only right thing I did. And through that experience, I ended up meeting one of my good friends that I still talk to today. Okay, I have to say this part. Part of what kept me sober is I had in the back of my mind, if I start playing baseball again, and I make it to the big leagues, then I'll be the comeback story of the century. And so I did. I was practicing daily. It was not coming back. I was after a few years of running and gunning, the body's not ready to kind of be peak performance, MLB status ready. But this kid, he grew up playing baseball too, actually to a rival of Holly Springs at Fuquay Arena. And he would throw the baseball with me. We got pretty close through that. Eventually, in my first year of sobriety, I realized that going pro was probably not it, and probably not going to be in my future. So I just continued going to meetings and working for a construction company. But I say that because that man probably saved my life. The amount of times he would call me, say, "Hey man, let's go to a meeting tonight. I'm on the way to your house already," and kind of hold me accountable. So at this point, as I'm trying to make my comeback. I don't have a home group. I don't have a sponsor. I'm not doing anything in AA. I'm just kind of showing up, sitting in the back, not talking to anybody, and hoping to stay sober. And what got me doing stuff was he started taking all those actions. He had relapsed prior and was pretty motivated to kind of dive head first. The things he didn't do, he started doing this time. He got a sponsor immediately. He got a home group. And I started watching him do it, and me being competitive, I'm like, if he's doing it, I can't not do it. So I went through 5 different sponsors early on in sobriety. Just every single one would ask me to meet up with them. I would say I was sick or something. Just make up an excuse. One was like, yeah, I don't think we're going to be a good fit, man. And and then, there were some willing men willing to help me, and I just was not willing to even meet up with them, so it didn't really work out. Well, 90 days go by, and I'm leaving a meeting, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to drink, but I need to do something. This is not it. I was living with a guy for quite a while that I knew could give me something that I was looking for at the time. And never once did he not answer a phone call, not answer a text. We were pretty close. I even talked to him early in sobriety and told him what was going on. And to this day, I haven't heard back text or call. And that was the first time in sobriety I was like, maybe this is supposed to happen. I don't know why, but that was the first kind of feeling or connection to something bigger than myself that I recognized in sobriety. So the next day I go to a meeting. Some guys raise their hand to be sponsors, and I just asked this random guy to sponsor me. He didn't look like me. We had no common interests. I don't think we ever would have hung out outside of the program, but I truly believe that man saved my life. And the reason I say that is, in my experience, it didn't matter, to have a perfect fit for a sponsor. It didn't matter if I could be best friends with this dude. All that mattered is he had a working knowledge of the 12 steps and stayed sober for a lot longer than I had been at the time. So every Sunday I met up with this guy at Dunkin' Donuts in Cary, and he took me through the big book. We started working the steps. I got to my 4th step, and let me backtrack a little bit. At this point, it was still very hard for me. I still had this kind of preconceived idea of God being this Catholic version, if you will, and I was not okay with that. I had a lot of resentment, with family, with my parents separating, all this other stuff that I tied back to the Catholic Church, and it was very hard for me to say that I was willing to allow God to run my life at this point. And he kind of explained it to me. He was like, "Are you willing to continue with the steps?" He was like, I don't need you going to church, but I highly recommend you start praying, and you start praying for willingness to try to connect with something bigger than yourself. I said, okay, I'll continue with the steps. Every day he would ask me, "Are you praying? Did you pray this morning?" I'm like, "No." And it became, "Hey God," or I think it was like the serenity prayer or something. It was like a 30 second block I would give over to God in the mornings just so I could tell this man I prayed. And that's how it started for me. Well, he took me through the steps, and at this point I said, I want to join the Army. So I go to the recruiter, I sign all the paperwork and all that stuff, or whatever you have to do, submit paperwork, and he's like, we're going to have to get you a waiver for that resisting a public officer charge. And I'm like, great. So that took a year and a half to go through that waiver process, and I believe that was absolutely God, making sure that I was fully ready to join the Army before he sent me. I truly believe that God doesn't give me anything that I can't handle. Everything's for a purpose. And at the time, that was hard to see. But through that waiting period, I started getting extremely involved. I got a home group. I got a service position at that home group. Originally, it was selling raffle tickets. I really didn't want to talk to anybody when I first showed up here, but that forced me to know everybody. I knew everybody, first and almost last name basis. Because I was trying to sell these raffle tickets, and like the money was going into our literature fund at the time, so it was selling 12 and 12s, big books, or it was whoever, raffle ticket got called off, got whatever sort of AA literature we had for that night. But through that experience, it really got me involved. And I had an obligation to be there 2 times a week. So it wasn't just me showing up, sitting in the back and not doing anything. There was a purpose for me to be there. If I didn't show up, then somebody else had to do my service position. And it gave me that sort of accountability and responsibility that I absolutely needed at the beginning. But in addition to that, the fellowship is what kept me sober. That sort of accountability of other people, it gave me a purpose and a reason to stay sober before I could really connect to God. And I truly believe the fellowship is what kept me sober for the first 3.5 years of my sobriety. I ended up joining the Army and moving to Fayetteville in 2021, and it was right when COVID started. I got active there. Got a new sponsor down in Fayetteville and reworked the 12 steps. I told him, hey man, I've already worked them. And he said, no you haven't. He goes, you're doing it again. And I was like, God, all right dude. But it was the best experience. And that was the first time I realized, like, I don't think I'm ever going to be done working the steps. I still have to take a daily inventory. I still have to pray and meditate, and I still have to practice all these principles in all my affairs. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned the past couple years that I think is unique to the Army is a lot of times I don't have access to a meeting. I don't have access to a phone or whatever the case may be. I'm gone for training. I'm doing something. And when I went through the steps the second time, I realized the fellowship really didn't suffice for me. It was good. It kept me sober for a long time, but I was missing the key portion of the steps, which is that connection to God. We went through the part in the big book. Why don't you see where religious people are right? Why don't you start seeking that out? Why don't you go try some churches? Why don't you try to expand your spirituality a little bit? And so I did. I went to 3 or 4 churches that I absolutely hated. I did not enjoy it whatsoever. At this point, I was still very unsure about the whole idea, but I continued to go back, and I ended up landing at a church that I really enjoyed. And I have absolutely seen that complement this. The program complements that. And that's me, again, practicing, in all my affairs. So I took what I learned here in AA, which is back to those basic things I was doing at the beginning, greeting people at the door. That was a service position I had, going around and talking to people. But also, and I'll backtrack a little bit. Before I joined the Army, I was sponsoring a bunch of people, and none of them were staying sober. I thought it was me. I was like, well, what am I doing wrong? And, I just realized, or I didn't realize this. My sponsor pretty much told me, it's that horse analogy. God, what is it? It's you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't force it to drink. And he said that to me, and I was like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm doing what I'm supposed to." And the point of me saying that is I stayed sober through that. Unfortunately, these guys didn't stay sober, but I did, and I just continued to try to help people. And I realized joining the Army, not being around AA meetings or whatever, it was pretty hard to do that. So I took that same principle and applied it outside of AA. I started to try to help the people that were around me, talk to them about God, talk to them about actually something with substance. And it has absolutely worked for me. In applying the connection with God that was provided to me through the 12 steps and through this program, and actually working the program, that has helped me take it outside the program as well. And when I was in Fayetteville before, and it was the same thing. There was one or two guys that actually stayed sober, but most of them didn't. But the only thing I did right is I continued to try to help people. I continued to try to take them through the 12 steps and realize that it really wasn't for me. It was to give them this thing that I've been given. It started, I started getting out of myself a lot more. All that, anxiety or whatever you want to call it, those weird emotions that you get, all kind of went away when I was talking to a dude on the phone. They all went away when I was sitting down with another human being. Sometimes it was replaced by stop complaining, but I did the same thing. And I was complaining all the time when I first showed up to this program. And, that it's a healthy reminder to remind me where I came from. Because sometimes it's easy to forget. But maintaining a routine of coming to meetings and helping people, it relieves all those things that I was constantly trying to relieve over the entirety of my life. The nervousness, any sort of emotion I didn't really like. That's why I tried to suppress it all. But it was through my second sponsor and going to A Vision for You, which that's my last home group, A Vision for You off Executive Drive in Fayetteville. If you're ever in Fayetteville, I highly recommend that meeting. It's a great meeting. But we started getting active with things on Fort Bragg. I'll backtrack again a little bit. A big thing for me that kept me sober early on was going into institution meetings. I feel like it's a very important thing that I don't want to overlook. I'll never forget the first institution meeting. I was, a couple months sober or whatever, and I told my story not thinking anything was going to come of that. And about 2 months after that experience, one of those guys walked into my home group and said, "Hey, I remember your talk. It really helped me." I'm like, I don't know what I said, but that's awesome. And that was a very, very gratifying experience that I had. And kind of fast forward to my days in Fayetteville, they didn't really have a lot of stuff in Fayetteville, so they were really reaching and going into Roxy and going to My Rover Reese and taking meetings there, which was very different than up in Raleigh, where you have all these institutions to go into. You could go in weekly if you wanted to. It's not really that accessible in Fayetteville, but we tried to implement stuff like that. And, I tried to start going to those meetings again, and it kind of brought me back to that gratification that I was looking for again. And then, the Army, kind of dictates a schedule, and the reason I'm going to try to highlight this is because that connection piece with God that I found through working the 12 steps the second time is what carries me when I don't have access to a meeting, or don't have access to a phone, or can't really reach out to people. I'll give an example. When this was 2022 in Poland, I started a Bible study and templated it like an AA meeting where we would, it would be like a big book study where we would go through some scripture, and then everybody would go around telling their experience on it. And we would talk after, sometimes do it in the morning, have coffee, stuff like that. But I took what I learned here, and I was able to do it outside because there was no other options. And, same thing with my last deployment. And, over the past, however many months, I have found how important my relationship with God is. You know, when you take away the sort of fellowship and, you know, the meeting side, and I understand not everybody goes through this, but it really highlighted how important my spirituality was, how important it is to take that time in the morning and kind of get my day right, how important it is to kind of review my day and actually look at, okay, where did I go wrong? Do I owe somebody an apology? Because that even today can be a hard thing to do, is try to bring up something that happened and apologize for it. And you know, my sponsor said this kind of before I came here, but he was like, that's the point of the steps. The point of the steps is to gain an understanding and a relationship with something bigger than myself, and then to continue working on that. And we went through the Oxford Group books, which, if you're not familiar with the Oxford groups, it's kind of what predated AA, and Ebby was an Oxford Group member who got Bill sober. Short little synopsis of that. But those guys were meditating for an hour in the morning, you know, and I was having a hard time doing 5 minutes. You know, that was like what they were doing is a full hour. So what I did is I continued to try to build on that. Continued to try to make that prayer and meditation time a little bit longer, and I actually felt like I started hearing God and actually getting direction, and making my phone calls with other Alcoholics Anonymous members who were, you know, barely sober a lot more meaningful. And that's another thing, you know, when I was leaving a lot and knew that it wasn't right for me to sponsor other people, a sponsor is not the only way I can help another alcoholic. There's a couple people in Nashville, where I live in now, where my sole job was to call them and then put them in the hands of somebody else that I trusted, who could sponsor them and was around regularly, who wasn't going to leave and stuff like that. And it was the same sort of gratification. I mean, it's tough to beat a one-on-one, you know, interaction with someone for a long time, but it still sufficed. And that was just another option. And I felt like for a long time, my sole job was to sponsor people. Now I realize that's not my sole job here in AA. My sole job is just to think about other people and try to help them wherever I can, not limit it to this box. Because for a long time I limited it to a box. And you know, I think for me today, some of the most important things that I found is my relationship with God, helping other people so I think about myself less, and just showing up when even if I don't want to. I think with those three things, like my life's been pretty successful if I keep those priorities in check. I'll kind of end there, but I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble. Yeah. Thank you guys.